Thank you, Archdeacon. I think I got set up to be here this morning by some colleagues and friends of mine who put my name forward to Archdeacon, but I'm happy to be here nonetheless. And I bring you greetings from Father Khan and our congregation at St. Jude's in Stony Hill. And I thank Reverend Elaine for coming out of her typical seat to keep me company this morning. All right, so as Father had, Archdeacon, sorry.
It's okay.
Had said, I'm going to be talking a little bit this morning about mental wellness, mental health in our adolescents. And I'm happy to be here. As he said, my grandmother, Cicely Grant, she was like a stalwart here. I don't know if many of you are young enough to remember her, or should I say old enough to remember her. Yes, somebody remembers her, yes. And my mom and dad were married here 58 years ago, June 1965. So I feel like I'm connected to St. Luke's. I went through many sort of back and forths with Carlette this morning, trying to decide whether I was going to look very old like my actual age and walk with my paper, or I was going to put things on the screen, but I decided to be old and walk with my paper. So Carlette has worked with me this morning. So I see you're very similar to St. Jude's, that on a holiday morning, many of us are not here, but I also therefore will say good morning to those who are online and good afternoon to those who will watch the recording this afternoon. I know how it works, right? So hopefully it will reach. And my only goal this morning really is that hopefully when we all leave here, we will have a better sense of how to support our young people. I have one disclaimer. I am extremely biased towards the adolescent. I just have to tell you. Adults are very secondary to me. My young people, they're here, and everybody else will take a secondary rung on the ladder. And just one correction, so I'm a pediatrician, not actually a child psychologist. I work very closely with child psychologists, but more specifically, I'm an adolescent medicine specialist. So what does that mean? I'm slightly crazy enough to, as a pediatrician, decide I like adolescents enough to go and study some more about them, and I love it. Okay, so let's get into the meat of the matter. Father, am I allowed to take questions? You want me to do that? Or okay, so feel free if I say something that is not clear. I know us as Anglicans, we're not so noisy, right? But feel free to stick a hand up and I will address whatever it is. Or at the end, if you have a question, feel free. And let me make sure not to talk for too long, because I also know as Anglicans, we don't like that either, right? Okay, so a few myths that I would like to dispel. One, people use the term mental health and confuse it with mental illness. They're two different things. Mental health is just like physical health. We want to ensure we have good mental health. So some people think when we say we're going to talk about mental health, or there's a problem with mental health, that it means that there is a mental illness necessarily. And we also seem to think that everybody with mental illness is crazy. That's not a term we should really use. It's a very negative term, and we want to sort of move away from it. But more importantly, a lot of us manage to not use the term, but we think the term. And so we want to change our mindset towards persons, whether young or old, who have mental illness. And mental illness is a very wide spectrum. We can go from persons who have anxiety and depression, and these may be mild initially, or it may go all the way to the extreme where we have very significant mental illness and we're totally unable to function in the world as per normal, and we end up on the streets. Typically, though, people end up on the streets because others don't support them, for the most part, okay? There is this sense that adolescents, and by adolescents I mean anybody between 10 and 19, but I go a little older to the young adults, that anybody who is an adolescent has no good reason to be depressed. I have many parents who will tell me, I don't know why she's depressed. What's she depressed for? She have everything in life. She have a good food at the table every day, 3 square meals a day. She has a roof over her head. She goes to an excellent school. What she have to worry about? Why is she depressed? Very important for us to all recognize nobody in their normal state would walk out there and say, you know what, give me depression. I want depression. Give it to me. Nobody asks for it. So when they have it, it's not because they want to, it's because they just have it. It's kind of like high blood pressure. We don't go out there and say, can I please have high blood pressure so I need to take tablets every day? No, we don't. But some of us in here have it, okay? It's the same thing, it's just that a different part of our body is unwell. Instead of it being our blood vessels and our heart, it's our brain, okay? The next. A lot of people think that the data or the research that we hear, it doesn't really apply to us because it's not really about us. It must be from foreign because clearly our young people can't have those issues. I will dispel that myth today. And then, Father, I apologize. I might step on toes this morning here. A lot of us feel Christians cannot have depression and should not have depression. Enough people think so, you know, because we believe in God, so clearly we can't have depression. We can't have anxiety because why would we worry if we have God? Again, I say to you, nobody walks out there and says, please, can I have anxiety and depression? The same way our heart may give trouble despite the fact that we're Christians and despite the fact that we're praying is the same way our brains can have the same kind of trouble. So let's put aside that. All right. Now, first to sort of understand what adolescents do and how they feel and how they think, we should really look at how their brains develop. And a whole lot is going on. So yes, we know the critical years are between 0 and 3. And you know, many of us will miss the boat in those 0 to 3 because oftentimes we're young and we're having these kids when we're working so hard. You may have 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and you're juggling or you're studying along with it, or you're just trying to make ends meet because you're young, right? You don't have nothing put aside, so you're trying to juggle everything. And so we don't always get to put in those critical time and play times with our young people. So those are the critical years, yes, but there's another critical period after that 0 to 3, and that's in adolescence, which I see really as this sort of last hope for us to fix that trajectory where young people, when they become adults, can just soar. So as adolescents, although the size of the head is not changing, because we're done growing, right? There's a lot going on inside. And there's a really critical process called selective pruning. Some of you may have heard of it before, but what happens is all the little networks in our brain, the ones that get used, stick around. The ones that we're not using, snip, snip, snip. So if we're only using negative networks and negative connections, those will stay. And if we're using the positive ones, those will stay. So we have to make sure that we're using the positive ones so the negative ones get pruned away and not the other way around. Okay? Now I see from the audience I may be speaking to some young people, not too many. We may be speaking to a few parents, and I suspect quite a few grandparents, grandaunts, etc. And you know, your role oftentimes is to hold the family together as the grandparents. And sometimes, yes, your children are going to think you're annoying and why you're fastening up in them business, but guess what? You are here to advocate. So just like how Moses said to God, no, God, you cannot mash them up. These are your people that you took out of Egypt. So how you mean you're going to mash them up now? No, man, you can't do that. It's the same way you have to advocate for your granddaughter or grandson or grandniece, okay? Advocate nicely though, you know? You can't really just give instructions. You have to ask, and then hopefully your children will fix the situation for your grandchildren. Now, so we have the selective pruning. Now, in early to middle adolescence, parents tend to get a little frustrated because their young people get a little feisty. You know that way? They have an answer for everything under the sun. Everything you say to them, something fly back. And I speak this with a lot of experience because my daughter is currently 14 going 15. So I have a few years of feistiness under my belt. But what I also realize, sometimes when she says things, I say, wow, that's exactly what I would have said to my father. And I would have gotten into a whole lot of trouble for it. And I say, okay, but I'm a 21st century mother, so I'm going to keep calm. I'm not going to blaze her. I'm not going to ground her yet. Sometimes that might have to happen. but I'm going to have a conversation when she and I are calm. But it is typical in early and middle adolescence for them to challenge us. That is their job. Your job is to set the boundaries, hold the boundaries, but their job is to push them. And if they don't learn to push them, then when they become adults, they will just accept anything anybody says. We don't want that. We want them to be strong. We want them to be independent. So home is where they're going to practice. Okay? Now, during that time also, they get to that phase. You know, when they were young, like they were 7, 8, they thought you were awesome. They thought you as a parent or the grandparent knew everything. You were just a genius. You just had everything under control. And then they reach adolescence and they realize, it's not true. My parents really don't have everything under control. They're definitely not perfect and they have many flaws. And sometimes they are a little cheeky enough to tell us straight up, you know, you really don't have all the answers, mommy. So I'm not sure why you're trying to pretend like you have all the answers. And sometimes if we're thin-skinned as parents, we take that personally, like this is an affront against me. No, they're speaking the truth. They may not be putting it in the best words, but they're speaking the truth. So we need to make sure to be able to accept that criticism. We don't like criticism, but we need to accept it. And we may say, okay, is there another way you would like to put this so that it's a little more palatable for me as your mother or father to accept it? You can say that to them. And sometimes they'll be able to come back with a better way. But take the criticism and work to fix yourselves. I do not believe this adage that I'm too old to change. Absolute foolishness. We are never too old to change. It is harder for us, yes, because the networks in the brain have been set, but we can fix them, right? We can work towards fixing them. So because they now think that we're not as smart as we used to, they also think that their peers, their friends, people their age are just the bomb. They're awesome. They know what they're talking about. And now I'm going to listen to them. And we panic, right? We as parents, we panic. Oh, my Lord, what is she thinking? What is he doing? Where is he going? No, if you have set the groundwork and you did your work between 0 and 14 or so, relax. Sometimes they're going to do foolishness, yes, but they're going to hear your voice in their head and they're going to make the right decision, and you must trust them. Trust them until they give you a reason not to. Not the other way around. You know, not the other way around. We start at ground 0. I'm trusting you, right? Thankfully, we've finished early and middle adolescence and all of that drama. But in the middle of that, you know, I have to say, I think God has a sense of humor. Because in early and middle adolescence, we have this part of our brain that starts to develop called the limbic system. That's a fancy term. We don't need to remember it. But what is it? It's a reward center. And that is a part of the brain that gets woo when a little excitement comes around. That's a part of the brain that wants you to take chances. You want to get on the bike back and speed without a helmet. You want to do all sorts of things. And you don't think about the consequences. So really, it's an awesome time of life to be living, but it's very risky. Here's why I say that God has a sense of humor. So he made that part of the brain develop first, and then guess what comes after? The front of the brain that controls all the craziness that we do. The part of the brain that kind of works like the CEO, the one that says, okay, let's look at the pros and cons of this and make a proper decision. That comes way after, like 17, 18, 19, all the way up to 24, 25, that part of the brain is still developing. So don't you think God must be sitting up there laughing at us saying, you parents, you think you had it all under control? I thought I was going to give you a little excitement. Enjoy the excitement. Work through the excitement of middle adolescence. And they will come back. As a friend of mine said to me, sometimes like you have an alien in your house between about 11 and 16. And maybe if you're lucky by about 18, 19, your child comes back into the house. So be patient. Have faith. Now, there is another part of the brain that takes a really long time to develop. This is called the social brain. This one can go up to about 28. This is the part of the brain that allows persons to take other people's perspectives. So, you know, you as a parent, and I am guilty, sometimes like, how on God's earth could you have thought that that was okay to do? And I'm looking at it from my perspective of many decades older. They can't see that. They can't take your perspective, see how you're feeling, understand how you're feeling. It is a work in progress, right? I like to think of the adolescent brain as a work in progress. We always expect that they're supposed to be there. They're supposed to have it. They're supposed to have it locked. No, it's a work in progress. Some days they're going to be great. Some days they're going to drive you up the wall. And other days, you know, we're anywhere in between. But every day, you must love them, regardless of the craziness that they do. Okay? So I'm going to share a little bit of information with you now. So, you know, as I said, sometimes we think all the stuff we hear is just in foreign. It's not us. So I hope I don't bore you, but I'm going to give you a little bit of data specific to the Caribbean and more so to Jamaica. So about just under 10 years ago, some researchers from the UHWI did a paper on adolescent depression here in Antigua, St. Kitts, and the Bahamas. They all showed significant levels of depression. What do I mean by that? In Antigua, 55% of young people had some type of depression, whether it be minimal or severe. Don't you know how much we had in Jamaica? Of course, you know, we're on top, of course, because we like to excel. Not everything. We had 64%. So 6 out of every 10 young people were experiencing some amount of depressive symptoms. But what's more concerning is that 14% had severe depressive symptoms. What does that mean? That means at least 1 in 10 of our young people had severe depression. In other words, significant enough symptoms that it would interfere with their functioning. 1 in 10, that's enough, you know, enough. You just think of a classroom of 35 to 40 kids. At least 4 of them in there are struggling so much that they can barely concentrate on the schoolwork because everything else in their brain is muddled, right? So that's in the Caribbean. Then we come closer, a little bit more recently. A national survey done in 2017, 18.6%, so call it 19%, felt lonely all of the time or most of the time. Unbelievable. That's sad to me. And I pause to say there's a very big difference between being lonely and alone. You can be alone and very comfortable. You can be with a lot of people and very lonely because you may not have that connection, okay? So 19%. What does that mean? 1 in 5 of our young people feel lonely. It gets worse. 1 in 4 had seriously contemplated suicide. People don't like to hear that, you know. And we use all sorts of crazy euphemisms. Self-murder, unlive, crazy euphemisms. Why are we afraid to use the term? Maybe it's easier for some, but the bottom line is a lot of our young people don't want to be alive. That's concerning. On the flip side, because many persons with depression will also have anxiety, 13% of them, so 1 in 10, were so worried they could not sleep. And that increased from 7% in grade 8, where you'd be, let's call it 13, to 15% in grade 11. Now, lots of young people in grade 11, they're worried, what's going to happen after I finish high school? Will I be able to get into university? Will I be able to get into sixth form? Will I be able to get a job? How am I going to help to look after my family? All sorts of things. And we haven't even considered crime and violence, where you're gunshot or fire outside the yard. Your mother don't want you to leave the house because some Don is going to try and check you and make you his new flower to deflower. All of those crazy things that our young people have to deal with, right? Then, more recently, we sat down, because you know, you might say to yourself, okay, we gave them questionnaires, but what are they really saying? So we sat down and we talked in groups with young people between 10 and 19, almost 80 of them, and we asked them about their mental health concerns. And it was fascinating. They were so open and honest and willing to talk. You know, adults always say, young people won't talk to me. That's because you need to create the space for them to feel safe to talk to you. that after they share their information, you're not going to pick up the phone and call your sister immediately and tell her everything them just tell you. That's very annoying. I did not share my information with you, Mom, to go and tell Auntie Lisa or whoever else. Don't do it. Or you pick up the phone and call your mom. I didn't tell you to tell Grandma, did I? Didn't. Or you go to a function and you start to talk all about it. We do it, right? Because we need to vent and cope. No, find another space to do it. Not with other people, all right? So what did the young people say? Not surprisingly, the triggers for their depression included financial restraints and restrictions and difficulties. Listen to this now. Academic expectations from the family. Big pressure for them. Abandonment by family. So, you're gone foreign to go find a better life, but you don't really keep in touch with me. And then one of the most concerning things for me is that they felt that their voices were not being heard. What does that mean? We sit down and we hear them. The information goes in, but we don't really listen to them, so we don't make change. And that, even separate and apart from the data, the young people I see in my practice, that is often a concern. Have you discussed this with your mom or your dad? No. Why not? Trust me when I tell you, they don't want to hear. And even if I were to tell them, they would just tell me, what are you talking about? That don't make no sense, right? So we have to listen to them. We don't always have to answer them, We just must be listening and then find out from them how we can help them. And then, of course, in Jamaica, there are always gender differences, right? So the boys' concerns were that girls can show when they're stressed. The girls have the opportunity to show that they're sad or can talk about sadness. The boys cannot. And I know all the men in here will agree that, growing up, it was hard, because if you were feeling rough and having a bad day, who you gonna tell? You can't ball? No, you're a man. You must. I pause to say, even Jesus wept. So it's okay to cry. In fact, I think crying is very therapeutic. You don't need to cry in public at school, but in your space, with your close friend, with your parent, by yourself, with God, bawl if you want to bawl, right? And then get help. Now, a lot of us as adults, what I would say, the best thing about COVID is that it made us realize nobody is safe from mental illness. Nobody. We were all overwhelmed. We saw people from all walks of life struggle with anxiety or depression, all. But here is the problem. Now that COVID now keep no more, really, I mean it still is, but we have the concept that it's not keeping anymore. People have forgotten that. And it's almost like, okay, the stress of COVID is gone, so we must go back to normal, just like that. And maybe that's just how Jamaicans cope, right? I mean, sometimes I'm fascinated at all the things we have to do. And we just keep putting one foot in front of the next and we do our thing. I had a mother one day, I said to her, her daughter had depression, and I said to her, I think you are also depressed. And the mother said to me, I had to hold back from laughing. She said, Doc, I don't have time to be depressed. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, that is what I call very interesting, because whether you have time for it or not, it's happening. It's happening. And you need to get help, otherwise you can't help your child. All right. A lot of us may think that the impact of COVID is over, but it's long-reaching. So, a lot of us talk about long COVID, and then we only think about the physical symptoms. But there are long and far-reaching complications from COVID, because our young people spent 2 years not interacting with anyone. They never get to lean up on anybody. They never get to run joke with anybody. They never get to laugh out loud and get in trouble in the class. They never get to teeth out to the class and get caught by the teacher on the corridor. I had quite a few of those experiences, and you're like, oh my goodness, how do they always know when you're going to break the rules? What is that? And you get caught. So they didn't have any of that. And so that is why we have such inappropriate behavior right now. We have to take our time to sort of reacculturate them. And that's going to take years. This generation is going to really have that struggle for a good long while. And many of you will experience your young person with social anxiety, like they just don't want to come out of the house. They don't want to leave the house. They don't want to come out to the car. They don't want to go inside and pick up the food at Juicy Beef because I don't want to go inside. I don't want to see anybody. I don't want to talk to anybody. And it's real, right? But we have to help them through it. Social media. Nobody likes it except the young people. Well, I'm here to tell you, we cannot get rid of it, so you better learn to love it and help them to use it safely. You cannot watch them on the phone all the time. Do not fool yourselves that if you take away the phone, they will not go on social media. Only you believe that as the adult, okay? Because all the young people know how to get on social media without the cell phone, so don't kid yourselves. But you have to teach them how to use it healthily. Because there are lots of positives on social media. In fact, social media helped to save a lot of them during COVID pandemic because they were able to connect with their friends during that time. I cannot tell you how much worse it would have been if we didn't have cell phones to allow them to connect. They were able to go online for school, online to talk to their friends, online to talk to you, grandma or grandpa, because clearly you couldn't leave the house because we're all under lockdown, nobody never wants to get sick. Okay, so there are positives, but we have to tell them how to use it so that they don't end up in problems. You know, we all worry about porn and sex and all of that. I'm allowed to use that S word, right, Father? I'm going to use it anyway. We all worry about it, and we all say how awful it is, but none of us would be here if there was no sex in the world, okay? So we need to tell our young people how to go about it safely, how to wait. We hope until marriage, but it seems to be a dying concept of waiting until marriage, but certainly until you're old enough to really get a grasp of who would be good for you, who would be the person to make you feel good about yourself. I tell all my young people, if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, that when you're finished interacting with them in terms of just chatting and laughing or whatever, you feel worse about yourself than before, dump them. Dump them. No girlfriend or boyfriend must make you feel bad about yourself. Get rid of them. Don't feel bad. There'll always be another one. Don't believe the hype that there are no good men out there. Lies. Lie. There are lots of good men. You just have to wait. Right? And same for the boys. There are lots of good girls. Don't rush to pick up the first one that say, hey, let's hook up. No, that's a bad sign if she's so eager. Just pause and wait. Right? So we want them to understand how to use it. So sometimes you can just type in any foolishness and a porn ad just pop up, you know. Trust me, the internet is dread. And which young person is going to see naked people on there and not say, let me look at that? Everybody. But you need them to understand, you know, this is not a good way for people to be sharing themselves. We don't need all of that detail. And so you encourage them to not use that. You speak to them about, you know, respecting other persons and so forth, and that these pictures are definitely not respectful. You speak to them about sharing pictures of themselves. A lot of young people don't know that there are laws against that. It doesn't matter that it's your girlfriend or your boyfriend that you're asking them for a nude picture. It's against the law. They can be prosecuted. Many young people do not remember that. So we need to remind them that it's against the law. Okay, coping strategies. That was the other thing they spoke about. Some young people use alcohol, some use marijuana. I've had many a young person say to me, boy, doc, I have to just hold a spliff because I have to meds before I have to deal with my mother, because she dread. Right? And you have to then work with him and the mom to figure out a better way to be able to communicate and be with each other. Yeah? A scary one, I hope I don't scare you too much, because some of you may not know this exists, is something called cutting, where young people, predominantly girls, but some boys do it also, that when they are in a lot of psychological pain, they will inflict physical pain on themselves to distract themselves from the psychological pain. A very common coping strategy, and I'm going to say something very unusual for persons. It works. So the young person will feel better, but they will only feel better for about 15 to 30 minutes after having done it. Okay? So what we need to do is replace that negative coping strategy with a healthy coping strategy. And that's what it is. So don't freak out when you see it. Ask the questions. What's going on? How can I help you? Carry them for help. Go to your pediatrician. Go to your GP. Ask, where do I go to get help for this? Instead of calling down all sorts of drama and informing the whole family before you have a quiet conversation with your daughter or son. And then a big thing for young people is the stigma associated with mental illness. So people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to come to the doctor and talk about it. They don't want to talk to their parents, and parents don't want to hear that their kids are sad or depressed, because we're a good and upstanding family. We don't have those things. People are going to think that you're crazy if I go and tell them this. We have to put that aside. I often tell parents it's not about you. It's about your son or daughter, not about you. We're always saying, what's going to go on? Now, sometimes we talk in interesting ways to our young people, and we don't realize what we're saying. And I'm going to urge you to be a very non-judgmental adult with your young person. So, for example, you say to your son or daughter, listen, man, you better make sure so the next test you do, you get a straight up A, or else. We may think that we're encouraging them. What do they hear? If you don't get an A, I don't love you anymore. That's what they're hearing. A favorite of many people, I am grateful I never had this experience. Why can't you be more like your brother? Like really, why can't you be more like your brother? Do you know what they're hearing when you say that? They're not hearing, I'm putting him out there as a role model for you to aspire to. No, they're not hearing that. What they're hearing is, I love your brother more than you. Straight up, that's what they're hearing. Or if you talk about the friend. The next one. Seriously, why must you dress like that? And you screw up your face same way. Why you must dress like that? And you know what they're hearing? I don't value your opinion. Because you chose this dress, this outfit, and you have nothing positive to say about it. So I don't value your choice. So we have to be very careful about the words that we use and think about what the young people are actually hearing. Because sometimes we're saying it and we don't have a grudgeful spirit when we're saying it, we're not being mean-spirited when we say it. Sometimes we are, but we're not typically being mean-spirited. So we have to be careful to sort of fix how we're saying it. So the last thing I'm going to say, well, not the last, no, wheel that back, take that back. Some of the things you can look out for: young people who don't want to leave the house anymore, young people who are locked in their room all the time, not just most of the time, but all of the time. They don't want to eat family dinner with you anymore. They don't want to spend any time around with you. They don't even want to go and play with the dog who they always played with. They don't want to go to football anymore. They don't want to go to netball anymore. So they're sort of just pulling back into a little cocoon. Be concerned about that. If they're more irritable than usual, so if there is a change, so every little thing just annoys them. Yes, teenagers get annoyed easily, but this is a step above the typical, right? If their sleep is more disturbed than usual, because most teenagers' sleep is disturbed, or if there's a change in appetite, they're eating more or they're eating less. All of those sort of things we want to start to look out for. They have persistent, regular headaches, tummy aches, feeling tired all the time. Get checked. And I would say to you, very importantly, trust your instincts. So if something feels off to you, go and get it checked. So, a few last points. Adolescence really is a time to make mistakes. We think that they have to have it all together, but they don't. And don't let them feel that they have to have it all together. This is the time to make mistakes. This is the time to explore who or what we want to become. It's a time, as I said, to push the boundaries. So yes, they're supposed to challenge you. But yes, it's also a time for them to understand what consequences are. So you let them know ahead of time, if you do X or Y, this will be the consequence. And then follow through. Follow through with it. It's a time for them to determine their own personal values. They're not going to leave adolescence with all of your values, hopefully with a lot of them, but they're going to also bring on their own. And it's a time to be supported not controlled. So we like to control them. That's not our job. Our job is to support and guide. And that's hard. So my last closing point is that I would say to you, all young people, but really all adults, need a reference point. Growing up, when we used to go to the beach, because I grew up in St. Anne with my parents, and we'd be at the beach regularly, at least once a week. And my dad gave me awesome advice. Pick a reference point. So when I go into the sea, and I've taught my daughter, and I teach all young people who come to the beach with me, when you get into the water, you find a chair or a tree on the beach, and that is your reference point. Because sometimes in the water, and you drift along, and you're all chatting, and you're playing, and you can start to be swept along. And you must have the reference point so that you come back over. You tap back over. That's at the beach. All young people, all humans need a reference point. And I'm going to suggest to you that that reference point should be Jesus. Not Jesus with all the baggage we give to him, but just Jesus. We give a whole heap of baggage like Jesus was, he wasn't a teenager at once. He didn't have arguments with his mother. You remember when he argued with his mother and he said, "Mommy, pause for cause. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Hold up, man. I have this." So let's just look at him. He did things that were out of the ordinary. We often argue with our young people when they do things out of the ordinary, but that was his life. He did things that were out of the ordinary and made change. So let's embrace him as our reference point. And yes, I'm digressing from my health professional space, but I really think it's critical for young people to have a reference point. Don't throw it at them, just recommend it to them. Because if you throw it at them, they're going to dodge. That's what they do. That's what all people do. You throw something at me, I'm going to dodge. You should just maybe hand it to them and say, think about it. Right? I think our job as adults is a hard job. It is the most special job to look after young people. We got no guidelines when we delivered our children or we adopted them. We just sort of got thrown into the space, do what you have to do. And sometimes we think we have it all right, but we often don't. And so I think if we just work each day to be better and let's be honest with our young people, have the young people be able to talk to you honestly. Don't shut them up, don't lock them down, just listen. If it freaks you out, shut up. Think about your response and then go back to them. Don't speak in your freaked out state. They come home and say, "Oh, Mommy, my friend Debbie, she got pregnant." And instead of saying, "Wow, what do you think about that?" You say, "Make sure that I'm to you, because if you ever make that happen to you, don't bother come here." So when do you have the conversation about how they think about it? How are they going to prevent that, right? So remember, listen more than preach. Thank you very much.
Dr. Carl. We won't let you get away so easily. Are there any questions or comments that you'd like to make? Yes, I see. Well, I see what I couldn't see, but Jean has a question and Nola has a question. Take the mic, please. Okay, Nola, you go ahead, and then Jean, we'll take Jean afterwards. Whoever gets the mic first. Okay, Jean, go ahead.
Thank you, Abby, for that very clear and well-needed word. Don't know whether it's the age factor here, but I missed something when you're talking about managing the positive and negative input. If you could just elaborate on that. How do we do that? How does a young person do that, or anybody?
You mean on social media you're talking about?
No,
or just generally?
You're saying something about
sure.
the positive.
The brain network.
Yes.
Okay. So our younger generation, I think, is very good. Well, it's not just younger, to be fair. We are all, as Jamaicans, very good at identifying the problems. When I say we're good, we point out every problem that could possibly exist. but we are not spending sufficient time on finding solutions. So that really is where we want to be. So sometimes you can hear your young person with what I describe as negative talk. So for example, there is no way I'm going to pass that exam. Well, of course you're not going to pass it if you say you're not going to pass it. What do you mean? No, there's no way. I cannot manage all of this work. I feel like I have all these IAAs and SBAs, and there's no way I'm ever going to finish it. Those are the conversations. You don't entertain them. You say, okay, this is not a negative talk conversation. So, what's the first thing that you think you can take on? You help them to break it down into small pieces, and then you start to work on the easiest task to finish. So when they finish that task, you say, see, look how awesome you are. You were able to do the whole introduction for that IA today. Of course you can finish it. Those are the positive thoughts. They focus a lot on the things that bother them, and you have to guide them in terms of breaking it down to realize it's not critical. So for example, young people are very emotional and they have strong emotions. So let's say you have a boyfriend. Boyfriend for a really long time. So let's say 4 months, because in adolescent world, 4 months is long, right? And the boy breaks up with them. And they're traumatized. And it can happen both ways, so don't get me wrong. Boys get traumatized when they break up with girls too. And it's like the world is falling apart. And it's real feelings. And sometimes, as an adult, you can be saying to yourself, okay, you were together for 4 months, like, what's the big deal? But it is a big deal, because they have shared a lot with that person. They have grown to like that person, maybe even love them. And you know, we always say this foolishness, you're too young to fall in love. Foolishness. Romeo and Juliet were real young, okay? Let's get real. So they may have fallen in love. But what you have to do now is bring them back. And you see, a lot of parents are not comfortable with this sort of conversation. Well, what was good about the relationship? What did you learn about yourself? What did you find positive in this relationship? And then you say, awesome. So you still have all of these positives that you got from this relationship. Now, why do you think you broke up? And what are some of the things that in the relationship you did not like? Because guess what? If you don't figure out what you never like with this boyfriend and what never worked, you're going to pick up the same kind of boyfriend next month. So you have to figure out what isn't good and then be able to look at it down the road and pick the next person better. But if all you focus on is that, you're going to go to school and everybody's going to be talking about how you never, you're not together anymore, no. You look at how awesome you are. I tell my girls, walk with a princess mentality. I know that may sound very obnoxious, but I'm here to say walk with a princess mentality. What does that mean? I am a princess, and you must treat me like I'm a princess. Anytime you start to treat me like I'm not a princess, I'm out. Later, dude, gotta go. So these are the positives, Sister Jean, that I'm saying that we have to teach our young people to focus on the positives and not the negatives. I mean, the obvious negatives would be things like smoking, vaping, drinking, those sorts of things. But those are a little easier for us to see and feel, but it's the little in-between things on a day-to-day basis that sometimes can be tricky. That was a very long answer. I apologize.
Yes, go ahead.
It was an excellent presentation, Doc. Excellent. And I was thinking that, boy, we need a part 2 for the adults.
Well, that
because
I'm straight up paediatrician.
Okay, all right, I'm with you. Because really, I think a lot of us adults suffer in silence.
Yes.
And take our meds quietly.
Yes.
I mean, not prescribed meds. I mean, like meds that we find work for us. So I think it's worth considering. My second question was to do with, well, that was a comment. This is a question about is there a place where young people can go, that safe space outside of family, where they can go and feel unjudged and so on, and get care? And I'm talking in Jamaica.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay, so with regard to your comment, I think that's a really excellent point that you made. A lot of times when I'm taking a family history and I want to ask about mental illness in the family, because that's a risk factor for the adolescent to have depression or whatever else. And I say, is there anybody in the family with depression, anxiety, substance use issues? And then they'll say no. And I said, okay, let me rephrase that. Is there anybody in the family with these problems that you know has a problem, but they've never been diagnosed because they've never been for help? Because there are a lot of people who suffer in silence and try and fix it on their own because we're too embarrassed or we think we don't want to go and get help. So the second question, where young people would go. So I would say on a broad level, one of the really excellent places would be the Teen Hub at the Transport Center in Halfway Tree. It's an excellent space. There's no cost to it. They have persons there who can speak to you in confidence. They have other things as well, but like they help you with homework and SBAs and so forth. But they definitely, and I mean, they do other things. So, HIV testing if you're older and so on. But certainly it's a space where they have a psychologist that rotates through there on days of the week. So that is a really good free space. The other places that they can go with their parents would be to the child guidance clinics. So we have a few across the island. And I should say there's a new teen hub at the Princess Margaret Hospital, or attached to Princess Margaret Hospital in St. Thomas. So that's another space that they can go to. The child guidance clinics now, each region, health region, and I think most parishes have a child guidance clinic, but not all of them work every day. So for Kingston is the Glen Vincent Health Clinic, which has a child guidance center. So that's somewhere that they can go to also, because you want to make sure that wherever they go, they get confidential care, because they're so concerned about who is going to know their business and that sort of thing. So you want them to be comfortable going to where they're going. So I would say those are the places to start. And then, of course, you can always get privately. And your physician, whether your GP, your pediatrician, family doctor, can always recommend you to private sources as well.
Yes, Marcia.
Thank you for that presentation. My concern is that the transgender situation, there was an incident that happened at a high school where sixth formers actually asked a teacher if she would be prepared to call them they, whatever the pronouns are. And I wanted to find out, and I really endorse what you're saying, Nola, because we the parents, we don't have a clue. And if, especially, so if that comes up, how do we handle that transgender issue?
Wow, that's like a whole other talk. So the transgender issue is I would say a growing challenge locally. Well, I shouldn't say challenge, it's a growing issue currently. I would not say that there are a large percentage of young people who have that. And I do feel that, if somebody wants to be called they, if it don't take anything off of you, then, do that. But I am fairly certain that it will not happen consistently. Because most persons are not going to remember that if I'm looking at Reverend Elaine, who obviously looks female, that I'm going to remember to call her they instead of calling her, right? So it is going to be difficult, and I would urge the young people who are going through or are transgender or thinking or trying to decide whether they are transgender or not, that they be patient with persons, not get angry with them, but say, miss, I really would prefer it if you call me they or we, but not to take it personally if you don't get called that. I think a very easy way to avoid that conversation, though, is to call them by their name. Because then it's very simple. You call me Abigail, you don't have to say Miss, you don't have to say Ma'am, you just say Abigail. And then that's simple. And that way everybody is respected, everybody is comfortable with that communication. But over time, it is going to become more challenging. So yeah, to answer in a more detailed way would take a lot longer.
Okay, one final question before we close. Yes?
Adela.
And this will be the last question.
Thank you very much for that presentation. And I'd like to remind all of us who are adults and young people alike that if we turn to the book of Proverbs, we will see some of the issues and the solutions to some of our current problems. Book of Proverbs. Thank you.
Did we hear that?
I think she was reminding us to read the book of Proverbs. Was that correct?
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Harrison Kong. Excellent presentation.